it's maybe a bit of a record to have to talk about the Israel-Palestinian conflict in 1/4 of an hour. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to play you a short video, which is a video which was produced by Jews for Justice for Palestinians, which I think gives one of the best backgrounds that I know of, and it lasts about 6 minutes. And then I'm going to do just a few slides, sort of talking about the impact of the conflict on the people who live in the area. So the video first.
What would happen if you built a refuge for a persecuted people in a place where another people already lived? In the next few minutes, you'll learn why this moral quandary is at the root of the struggle between Israelis and Palestinians, and what you can do to help achieve a just peace for everyone in the region. First, there are a couple of things it's helpful to understand. One, many Jews fled harsh persecution in anti-Semitic Europe, especially the Nazi Holocaust. Zionists encouraged massive immigration to historic Palestine, at that time a British colony, where Jews had an age-old connection and where small Jewish communities had long existed among larger groups of indigenous peoples. But when the UN offered the Jewish immigrants the majority of the land for a new state called Israel, for the indigenous Palestinians who lived there, it was a massive destruction of life. They rejected the UN's partition plan, and several Arab states invaded the new state of Israel. Israeli forces essentially erased over 400 Palestinian villages and towns. By the end of the fighting, Israel controlled 78% of historic Palestine. And when 750,000 Palestinians who fled or were expelled during fighting tried to return to their homes where the new state now stood, they were permanently barred by the Israeli government. While over 100,000 of their relatives and neighbors who hadn't left became second-class citizens of the new state, along with the new Jewish majority. Today, Palestinian refugees and their descendants number in the millions. Most are in the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and Jordan. Many are spread throughout the world, with millions still living in refugee camps, seeking to return to their homeland. To sum up, one group of refugees found a much-needed home, but in the process, a new group of refugees was created. Here's the second thing to understand. Israel was founded as a Jewish state. But now ask yourself, what exactly does that mean? People had lots of ideas about what a Jewish state should look like. Some called for equality for all citizens. But what was created, in practice, was institutional discrimination against non-Jews. In other words, Israel ended up being built on a blueprint of exclusion. The Israeli government wants maximum land and resources for Jews, but not the Palestinians living there. That's why, inside Israel, Jews get special privileges, including rights to land and housing, that are denied to the Palestinian citizens, who make up 20% of Israel's population. That's also part of why Israel has never defined its borders. In fact, they still hold on to land, the West Bank and Gaza, that they conquered in the war in 1967. Since then, Israel has built Jewish settlements throughout the occupied West Bank, building Jewish-only cities and supplying them with infrastructure like roads and army camps, schools, and even a college. Military occupations are meant to be temporary, but after 40-plus years, this one looks permanent and entirely unjust. In the West Bank, Israeli Jewish settlers and Palestinians live on the same land, but must live under two completely separate and unequal systems of Israeli law. The Jewish settlers dominate the natural resources, including water and agricultural land, and they're backed by the Israeli army. To maintain the occupation, Israel has demolished thousands of Palestinian homes and orchards, confiscated Palestinian land, bombed a captive civilian population in Gaza, and punished resistance with raids, arrests, and assassinations, all to gain maximum land, while making life so difficult for Palestinians that they will either leave or be too afraid to resist. Palestinians have fought back. For decades, they tried to achieve national liberation through armed struggle. Some groups still do, but the majority now support popular protest instead. the deeply harmful pattern of control, repression, and violence profoundly harms Palestinians living under occupation and Israelis living as occupiers. This must be broken to reach a peaceful and secure future for both peoples. Now that you understand the problem, what about the solution? What about peace talks? So far, over 2 decades of U.S.-backed peace talks have actually made things worse by helping Israel continue the occupation. It's been years of talking while Israel massively expanded the Jewish settlements and literally redrew the map. Peace talks are good if they're real, but not when they're theater to cover a land grab. So now what? The current world superpower, the United States, has been a terrible friend, enabling Israel's destructive and self-destructive expansion onto Palestinian land by funding the Israeli military, the biggest recipient of U.S. foreign aid in the world. But there's another superpower that can make the difference: you. There's a movement with hundreds of thousands of people just like you across the world, including Palestinians and Israelis, protesting, educating, divesting, and boycotting, all to bring nonviolent international pressure on Israel to stop violating human rights of Palestinians. Throughout history, where governments have failed to push for justice, people just like you, like us, have taken the lead and won. Now it's the Palestinians' turn for freedom and justice. We can pressure Israel to end the occupation and the discrimination. We want all people, Jews and Palestinians, to have equality, human rights, and democracy. We can change history. Join us.
Okay, so that gives you a little bit of an idea. I'm sure some of you have heard quite a lot in the news anyway. And I'm just going to give you a few thoughts of things that I've witnessed. Just to give you a little bit of background, I've been involved with the area for about 10 years now. The longest length of time I spent there was a 3 months' time as a human rights observer in the West Bank, in the occupied territories. So I can tell you a little bit about that one. But I also have quite a lot of Jewish friends who are peace activists as well. So that's where my perspective is coming from. So, just see if it's working. How's it? Which one do I? Is it that one in the middle? Or?
You might have to use the mouse to be honest.
Oh, that one.
Yeah, you might have to use or space bar or something.
Okay. So I'm going to just give you 5 minutes just talking a little bit about the impacts of particularly the occupation on the Palestinians who live in the West Bank. In the video you heard a little bit about Palestinian Israelis. That's the 20% of Palestinians who live in Israel. So this perspective is really about how the occupation is affecting Palestinians, the ones who live particularly on the West Bank, because I haven't been to Gaza. So my perspective is coming from the West Bank. And I'll also speak a little bit about the impact on Israeli citizens themselves. So the first thing to think about is that the wall. There is a wall. So if you go to Bethlehem, for instance, and a lot of tourists go to Bethlehem, one of the first things that you will see is a wall. So Bethlehem is more or less surrounded by a wall, which actually stops the people who live there, the Palestinians, from really going outside that area. Which means if you go to a checkpoint at 3 o'clock in the morning, you will see people queuing up there, trying to get out to get work in Israel. And that will depend on their permit, whether they can or not. So a lot of people are prevented from moving. And of course, what a wall means, and we know this with the Berlin Wall, don't we, that it separates two people. It polarizes people and starts giving people some ideas about one another, which actually can be which necessarily aren't based on truth. So the wall is something which hems some people in, stops freedom of movement, but also creates prejudice and difference. It's not going to work, is it? Okay. Sorry, this is supposed to work. Maybe that might help. Yes, it would. So the effects of occupation. One thing that you would observe if you spent any time on the West Bank would be loss of freedom of movement. So for the people who live on the West Bank, this might be the kind of scene that you would see. This is people's journey to work in the morning. So you would have to go through a checkpoint like this. So going through the wall in Bethlehem, as I say, 3 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, you'd see queues of people trying to get through to have employment on the other side, or to access hospitals, ordinary services. Loss of livelihood. I spent 3 months on the north of the West Bank, near Nablus, and a lot of my job as a human rights observer was answering calls of ordinary farmers like this man here on the left, who was saying, please come and see what's happened. The settlers have come and destroyed my olive trees. And this particular man, his whole crop was just wiped out. They'd come in the night and just broken all his olive trees. So that was his livelihood for the year. And the village where I was living, the village on the right, is actually, as you can see, quite a poor farming community. And they are now living on 20% of their land because the rest of the land has been taken away from them. The other thing which is a problem for the people living on the West Bank is lack of access to essential services. For me, the worst scenes that I witnessed was visiting communities in the Jordan Valley. Now, maybe some of you have read the Bible. It feels quite romantic, doesn't it? The River Jordan. We've all heard about the River Jordan. You think about maybe quite a lush valley. As you can see, it's very dry. I was there June to September. It didn't rain at all, and it was 40 degrees centigrade. And this is a community that we visited where they used to be really very fertile. They used to produce oranges and lemons. And we visited the village and we could see, well, there weren't any oranges and lemons, but they were producing stuff like aubergine. And they also had big vats of water, and they were sort of more or less sharing out the water in the village. But we passed a pumping station, and that's their water, but the water was being pumped to the settlement. And then we visited another community where they were buying in water, and this is a lorry carrying a tank full of water, and yet they were living next door to the settlement where they had swimming pools and sprinklers and everything. So you could see the unequal access to water. And the whole situation there is one of injustice and inequality. So you can see on the right-hand side, you can have very poor farming communities living right next door to a settlement, which is maybe what we would think of as there are high-rise flats, it's all very comfortable, they have all the services that they need, and those are side by side in the same territory. And then if you're unlucky enough to try to build a house in an area where you're not really supposed to build a house because it's the wrong area and it's designated as Israeli state land, although you've always lived there, then you may end up having your house demolished, which is what happened to the family on the left. So those are just some of the effects of the situation. The other thing is a sense of loss and grievance. So this is a refugee camp in Bethlehem. Doesn't look very much like a refugee camp. The refugee camps look quite permanent now, but you can see on this one, which is Aida camp in Bethlehem, as you go into the refugee camp, they've got a big key over the door. Well, what does that mean? It means there are some people in that refugee camp who've still got the keys to their property in 1947. And so they've been made refugees twice. Probably their home doesn't exist anymore. Probably there's an Israeli family living there, but they've still got that key, because to them that means these were the lands that we used to live in and that we've now been exiled from. And there's fear and insecurity. So on that slide, it's quite interesting because the lady on the left lives in a village near Nablus, and she was showing us how some settlers had come and tried to get into her house and thrown paint bombs and frightened her children. And on the right-hand side, there is a house in an Israeli town called Ystyried, which is very near Gaza. And every house in that town has special security in case there are rockets coming over from Gaza. So you can see that the fear and insecurity is on both sides. And the conflict goes on. So we know the Six-Day War, which caused the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. That seems quite a while ago now. But, you know, since then, we've had the invasion of Lebanon. We've had 2 intifadas, one in 1980s, which was relatively peaceful, and one in 2000, which wasn't so peaceful. And we've had recently, you probably remember, 2 campaigns in Gaza. You know, and I've just put 2015 question mark, 2016 question mark, because actually what's happening is the root causes of the problem aren't being addressed. And that's just a slide with a question, and you probably have some thoughts yourself. So what's the solution? The video thought it had some solutions, which was us. That's the international community. You know, if we put pressure on governments, does that change things? It might. You may have some thoughts about that. One of the solutions might be this lady on the left. She's an Israeli lady, and you see she's quite elderly now, and she belongs to a group called Women in Black. And they go and stand on a roundabout in West Jerusalem, not occupied East Jerusalem, every Friday with their placards that say, "Stop the occupation." And you might think, what's the point in that? But they believe if they stand there, that maybe in the end they might have a bit of an influence. And the young lady on the right, another perhaps sign of hope, she has been given a video camera by a human rights organisation called B'Tselem. B'Tselem is the Israeli version of Amnesty International. So when there's an incident with the settlers and they're coming maybe to attack the village, she will make a film, which is then evidence of what's happened. So that is objective evidence of human rights abuses. So that is another way that you can try to bring some kind of a just solution by actually exposing what's happening. And there are lots of organisations that are trying to do that. So Christian Aid's got lots of projects. And the project that I volunteered with, Ecumenical Accompaniment Programme in Palestine and Israel, quite a mouthful, is a project of the of the World Council of Churches. And that sends human rights observers to stand alongside people who are suffering from occupation. So that just gives you a bit of an overview, and it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. And I'm going to hand on to the next speaker. Thank you.
We will go straight to Amina to talk about her experiences, and after that, we'll ask you if you have any questions for either of our 2 speakers.
Hey, afternoon, everyone. My name is Amina Abdi. I'm an asylum seeker from Somalia. I come from a little in Somalia, we've got a little town just at the border of Kenya and Tanzania, and it's they're called the Bajuni Islands. So that's like the minority tribe of the Somali. A lot of people, when they hear Somali, it's quite big. We have the north, and then we have the south. Nobody hears about the south because we are really oppressed, and the north Somalis don't like us. So just like you've seen here, kind of the same thing we go through. The soldiers from the north always oppressing this South Somalian, let me say the Bajuni people. We would, you know, sitting at home, come to the evening, you don't know what's coming. Next thing you know, people are running, fires, houses are being lit with fire, you know. We got soldiers coming into the houses, they want valuable things, just basically, if I could use the word, bullying, simply because we are just a minority tribe. All they want is for us to leave Somalia and go elsewhere, but where? Because obviously all the other countries have their own people. It's easy to say move to Kenya or Tanzania, but Kenya and Tanzania have their own people as well. So they don't want all these people flocking in, just like you see in these other countries. They are forever showing it on TV and everything, but it's also happening in Somalia. Yeah, Kenya would send, like last time, they sent the soldiers over to come and help, you know, but where do they set up camp? They don't set up camp in North Somalia, they set up camp in South Somalia. So we still, this is the reason why, because they're trying to stop the soldiers from coming over and just doing whatever it is they do. We have a lot of the men, obviously being a Muslim country, a lot of the women don't work. So our work is to sit at home, look after the children, maybe go to the gardens, if I can call it that. So the men go to work, they go, most of them are fishermen. Sometimes they go, all of a sudden, soldiers will turn up, we want your boat, you know, or they ban the boats, and then what happens? You have nothing else to go to fish, so that means you can't sell your fish, you can't provide for your family. So a lot of this is going on in South Somalia. A lot of poor people are very poor. They don't have much. The little they have is taken away from them almost all the time. You know, you could easily ask, why don't you just go? Yeah. Once upon a time, they set up a camp in Kenya. Most of the Bajuni people did go, but after a while, nobody wants to live in a camp. They said, okay, South Somalia is safe, come back. People went back, but it just carries on, you know. We come back again, they come back again, and they begin, you know, just terrorizing people for no apparent reason, just because they can, just because there are more of them than we are, you know. So, like for me, same experience. From time to time, they would come into our villages, they would, you know, like I said, burn their houses. We would run and hide. Sometimes we run into the trees. You know, you try even and climb a tree just so that they don't get you. They're not very good to the women and the girls because most of them will rape you if they find you. And, you know, some of them are so severe, some people don't come out of it, they die, you know. So they did it to my family. They killed my dad. My mom couldn't handle it. Eventually she died. Eventually, they killed my brother as well, all in this trying to defend the family. I was lucky enough to be able to leave the country. I left by boat, which was 3 days into Kenya. And then when I was in Kenya, tried to help myself, you know, as you can see, I speak English. A lot of them don't do that. So I studied a little bit, but in the process, also trying, you know, to build up my life. And it didn't matter where I could go and get settled. I just wanted out. Kenya at the time when I was there were having conflicts as well, in internal conflicts. So they are already fighting within themselves. They don't want other people from other countries. So I was lucky enough to get what we call an agent who said, okay, I've got a ticket for you, let's go. I didn't know where I was going. I took the plane and I left and I found myself in England where I claimed asylum and I'm still waiting. Yeah, so a lot of the Somalis are here, or let me say around the world, many of them, because, you know, you read in the newspapers, we have pirates, you know, they come in all sorts. We have soldiers, we have pirates, we have just people who want to bully. That's it, because that's their way of life. They don't know anything else. There are no jobs. You know, the land is dry like that. You know, you can't hardly do anything with your life. So I can say I'm lucky. I left. I'm now here. I've been here for 6.5 years. I have a daughter who's 4. And I'm happy that she doesn't have to live like that. She can live like you. You know, you don't have to think of who's coming to knock on the door anytime. You know, you kind of have a freedom to do whatever you like. As well as being a woman, I wasn't allowed to do anything other than have children and look after the home. But being here, I'm free to do whatever I like. I'm studying. I'm trying to make a better life for me and for my child so that we don't have to get sent back to that kind of life. Because that is not a life that you just don't know if tomorrow you're going to be alive or tomorrow you'll have a leg or a hand, because they do come with guns sometimes and they don't segregate. They don't kill the men and leave the women. They kill anybody in their way. So I've been lucky. I don't have any scars to show anything that happened to me, but I know in my head that a change needs to be done in the world so that places like this, like Somalia, it doesn't have to happen, and we can all live without war. Thank you.
both our speakers. I think that really helps from both those experiences to bring home what it is we're talking about when we discuss conflict and the human cost of wars that continue in the world today. So it's over to you now, and to ask you, first of all, whether you have any questions that you'd like to ask either of our speakers, or if it's a general question, you can ask it to both of them. Who's going to be brave enough to ask first? Yeah, go ahead. Thank you. Yeah. Can you put your microphone on when you speak? Thanks.
Both of you have talked about atrocities, and presumably you would like to see the perpetrators brought to justice. I was wondering what both of you feel is the place of justice in bringing about a peace settlement.
Well, I don't know what could be done for them because there are so many of them, and they really don't have anyone ruling them, if I could say that. That's why they have countries, like I gave an example. Kenya has sent over soldiers to try and make the peace so that people can be, can live a better life. But guess what happens? They retaliate. So now they bomb Kenya, So they just, it's like leave us alone to do whatever we want or else. So that's what they're doing. So other countries don't want to get involved, really, because then their people are the ones who get hurt. So, like I say, I would love the war to end, but me sitting here, I really don't know what I can do other than educate people on what is happening and hope that, you're the future, that maybe something could be done.
Yeah, as far as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is concerned, I mean, I think it's really important that we are campaigning, if you like, for peace with justice. So, I mean, one thing that you could lobby your MP about would be to bring to the notice of your MP that settlers, for instance, on the West Bank can commit crimes. Basically, if you're talking about damaging property or you're talking about injuring people, but that they don't get prosecuted. And then what tends to happen, the army will come to that scene and they will attack the Palestinians. So, I mean, if you could, we can all raise the awareness of our MPs about that, because obviously there's a system of injustice being perpetrated. And I think partly it's about raising awareness of that. And I think, we can all do that. And just put a bit more pressure on Israel to have a more just system.
One of the difficulties, I think, this is from me speaking now, is that post-conflict, when a conflict finally comes to an end, it can be very difficult to define what justice actually means, I think. After Northern Ireland, after the Troubles ended in Northern Ireland, within the UK, there was a whole issue about to what extent you punish the people who were terrorists. On a much bigger case would be South Africa and what happened after the end of apartheid with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that was set up, where it was decided to not apportion blame to those who did terrible things during apartheid, and to have a system where people, if they confessed what they'd done, would not be punished in the usual criminal system. Now, not everyone agrees that that's worked for South Africa, but it's a very, very difficult issue, I think. Yeah, there's a point up. No, I thought you had waving your hand there. Okay. Nearly picked on someone there. Okay. Yeah, there's 2 points there. Which of you'd like to go first? Okay.
To ask about the Palestine-Israel conflict, there were lots of accusations during the crisis in the summer, a few months ago, about whether or not the BBC were sort of an unreliable source and a bit biased in favour of Israel. And certainly the presentation you gave just then made me feel that they had been biased in the summer to giving Israel the upper hand. Do you believe that?
I do think that it's true that you could accuse the BBC of biased reporting. I mean, what I'm not doing here is at all justifying acts of terrorism. I would definitely condemn, firing rockets into civilian populations, for instance. But just as I condemn, violations by the army and disproportionate action, as we saw in the summer in Gaza, completely, although it was targeted, it was very indiscriminate, really. I mean, was it 17 warnings that they had in that school, which was bombed? And, you think, how on earth could that happen? So I would say what you don't hear on the BBC very often is the sort of stuff that we observe day by day in the occupied territories, where people are harassed, their property isn't safe, they don't get access to services. It's that kind of side of the situation that we don't really hear about.
Thanks. We'll come back to your neighbour afterwards, but we're going to go up to the back first. Yes, go ahead.
As someone coming over to Britain seeking asylum, how have you found your experiences over here? Do you think that we're well enough educated about it? Have you come across much prejudice, or just what have been your experiences generally?
Well, obviously, yes, from some people, because the perception is, from most people, is that asylum seekers just come here for free things, but they don't actually know the stories. Hence, like, I'm here telling you mine. If you met me on the street and I said I'm an asylum seeker, maybe some would go, oh, freeloader, But a lot of people have real sad stories, and like I said, even marks to show it. So some are lucky, they get through the system and they go along, so they don't really get time to, they get time to actually sit and say, okay, I'm safe, and, carry on with their life. But obviously, as your process is going on, you always also live in fear that you could go back. And for some countries, you go back, they're waiting for you. Oh, you took off, So you don't know what will happen if you go back. So that's the hardest part of being an asylum seeker, is until your case is accepted, you don't know whether you'll go back there.
Thank you. So some excellent questions we've had so far. Did you want to add something? Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
There are Christians in Palestine.
know that they are really coming here for safety and not, they are fleeing for safety and not just because they're chasing some sort of dream that everybody thinks they have in their head. They're chasing a dream, but the dream is just not to die. And you see it a lot in Italy and how women are carrying their babies across dangerous waters. You wouldn't carry a child across waters like that just because you wanted to come to Britain. You do it because you're desperate. You've got no other option. I just want to say that. Just to bring that in.
Thank you for that. Well, we'll just take one or two more questions for now. I said I would come back to you, sorry, and then we'll go to the row behind you. Thanks.
There's obviously a lot of active help happening in Israel, but in South Somalia, you talked about the Kenyans trying to intervene. Is there any active support going on now to try and stop the oppression from the North Somalians?
Well, we have the groups that come in, like, you know, World Aid and stuff like that. But, like, you know, there's so much you can do. You know, you stay there, but you also have to think about your life because, like I said, these soldiers don't play. They don't care. You can see how the pirates, they capture anyone, you know, it doesn't matter. When they see this, because all they want is to be left to do whatever they want to do. So they do anything to get people out. But there is, you know, like I said, World Aid, Red Cross, do try and go into these places to help us, you know, because there's a lot of diseases and, you know, like just the life is not good. So we do need help. So they do come, but obviously there's a limit to what they can do.
Okay, and there was a question just behind there as well. Thanks.
I understand that you're trying to stop or prevent it in any type of way, but if you guys are put in the position to stop it, what would be the first steps that you guys would take?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things is to raise awareness. I think really for people to sit down together. I mean, I think there was something in the video about, you know, if peace talks are really meant, then they can be effective. So both sides have to really want peace. And I think that was what I would want, would be really effective peace talks where actually both sides really do want peace and not just to drag out a situation so that they can, you know, grab more land when they've got some kind of a ceasefire in place. So that's what I would want, would be real talks. And probably that America seriously gets behind those talks. And I know there are problems with that because of stresses and strains in the US system. But that's what I would like, real peace talks.
Same. You know, I think that's one of the only ways that can really work is if they sit together and come up with, you know, a way to get over this, because you know, you just keep saying and saying something, obviously they're not going to listen. So I do believe that proper peace talks would help.
Thank you. I think I saw there's two more hands. Let's make these the last two questions for now, I think. Go ahead, yeah.
I tend to find that before this talk, I didn't really know much about the Palestinian and Somalia big problems at the minute. And it kind of just sort of sparked on me that the media do not explain what is actually going on. They kind of go, oh, there's a war going on, but they don't go into huge detail about it. And I think it's really stupid, really, because they don't actually spread awareness of what's actually going on. I mean, this has been going on almost on a permanent basis now, as you were saying, and young people especially, we don't know what's going on. We don't know what the problems are. And I tend to find that, especially in the media, it's a huge fault that they're not explaining this further. And I was just going to ask you, what would be the best way to spread global awareness about both issues, do you think?
There is a lot on the internet. So if you go digging around on the internet, though, of course, you have to exercise some caution and your critical thinking as well. But there is a lot of information on the internet. I would say as well, human rights groups like Amnesty International. So if you go to their annual reports, you will get a, you know, a balanced report of the human rights abuses that are happening in a situation like Israel-Palestine. So, you know, that can help. NGOs, yeah.
And we'll go to one more question.
As you were saying, obviously peace conferences are the ideal way of dealing with these issues currently. However, often the issues there are deeply ingrained and rooted in the countries, and it's not, as you said, it's not usually that simple. What are your opinions on actually other countries, as you said with Kenya, kind of going in there with armies and actually trying to fix the problems that way? Like, what are your opinions on that? Because obviously it's been done in the past and hasn't worked. And I was just wondering what you two thought of those.
I think, well, Kenya went in, but if they had backup from stronger countries, maybe it would have worked, you know, because it's so easy. We are neighbors, you know, they think, oh, it's just the neighbor coming in. But people have a sense of they fear maybe America or Britain more, you know, they feel like they are stronger countries. If maybe it was them who went in to help, maybe it would have made a change. So I think being just a neighboring country, I don't think it made an effect. It affects them in any way. They just think, okay, we'll just come in round your way and mess up. So, you know, personally for me, I think I would say America and Britain maybe should try and help Kenya and surrounding countries and then go in. I think it would make a change.
I mean, I think countries like the UK can play quite a part as far as diplomacy is concerned. I think we mustn't forget that. And we mustn't forget the United Nations, and I know it doesn't work perfectly. But I think there are problems in sending armies in because armies are never impartial, are they? I mean, I think maybe if it's a peacekeeping force that is holding some kind of a peace agreement, then that's maybe a different thing. But I would go back to what they said on that video, and I think speaking to ordinary Palestinians, the answer they see is us. They see the international community as being more powerful than anything else. Just think that if we all lobbied our MPs and if we all supported boycott, divest and sanction because we thought that was a good thing to do, but don't do it without looking into it first, you know, if we all thought about what we could do and really put pressure on as, you know, as a civil society, we could really shift things.
To use the South Africa example, you know, there was a huge anti-apartheid movement for decades around the world, which certainly played a big part in helping to finally convince the white South African government to give up power. What we're going to do is just ask you to now take a moment to discuss amongst yourselves, because the last bit of this discussion before the break, what I want you to think about is, well, sort of two questions really. First of all, we've heard a lot about the First World War, and now we've been thinking about more recent wars. What are the similarities and differences between these conflicts that we've been hearing about? And the second thing is, I suppose, to think about this question of why are there still wars in the world today, which is, of course, a hugely complex question, not one we can answer in a few minutes, but I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on those questions before we go to a break. So just take a minute or two to discuss that amongst yourselves. I'd like to hear from some people we haven't heard from yet today, if possible. Okay? Okay, sorry to cut across your discussions, but I'm going to. Okay, so first of all, any thoughts on, well, actually, just opening it up, any thoughts on either of those questions, similarities or differences between these conflicts and why wars are still going on? Who would like to start off that discussion? Oh, there's a deadly silence. What about on the first point, first of all, about similarities and differences? What have you drawn out of that? Yeah, go ahead, please.
With the similarities, we kind of discussed that they're both suffering quite bad oppression from the other half of their countries. So, yeah.
Yeah, and perhaps there's a similarity between the two we've just heard about, but possibly it's a difference between them and the First World War, where it was more about relations breaking down between countries. Here we're talking about within the same country or territory, yeah. That's a really, really good point, thank you. go ahead. Yeah.
A similarity being that in each occasion that when one side or the other, they feel what they're doing is correct or right by what they're doing and by what they think the other people should be doing as well. So in both ways, they seem to be just basically taking the upper ground of what they believe is to be right.
Yeah, very few wars are actually about just grabbing land, are they? Or just sort of getting a advantage of money or whatever it may be. There's always seems to be some deep-rooted things, whether it's political, religious, historical reasons for people being in conflict with each other. Sometimes you feel that those are the reasons are being used as excuses, you know, but often they're very, very, really deeply felt reasons. Thank you. What about anybody from this part of the room? We haven't heard much from this part of the room, so go ahead. Yeah, thanks.
That works. Right. What I've struck difference is World War I, it was much more a clash of armies. Like the British army took on the German army, and the French army sort of was in there as well. But with these modern wars, it's not. You don't really get that clash of armies. You've seen that a lot with modern warfare. Places like Israel, Palestine, Somalia. We see the recent clashes in Ukraine. There's no longer battles of armies, more one army, like the Ukrainian army taking on a rebel force, like what do you call them? The Ukrainian rebels. That might just be how wars are fought now, that countries don't fight each other, but they fight more forces within that country.
Yeah, and one of the big differences now, of course, if you look back over the last 100 years, and I'm going to get this statistic wrong, but it's roughly correct, what I'm about to say, which is that 100 years ago, 80% of the people killed in wars would have been people in the military, and the other 20% would have been civilians. It's almost completely flipped over now, so that these days, the large majority of people who are killed in wars are actually civilians, people who are in towns when they're bombed, people who are having to flee for their lives, who are hurt in all kinds of ways by the implications of warring factions in a country, and but it's actually the people in the military themselves have relatively few losses these days. So that's a big difference as well, which sort of links to what you were saying, I think. Yeah.
Where in the First World War, a lot of media coverage was basically nationalist propaganda. Would you agree? The strange thing is that there's still quite a lot of misinformation, or just complete lack of information in the media today. But to me, at least, it seems like that's more because people don't care as much. Generally, with conflicts, because there are so many of them happening all the time. So maybe is it that more than the media trying to present a certain view, because of the internet people can find their own information more easily? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, does anybody else want to follow up that point about media coverage? Because that's something that was being raised a few times in this discussion. Which, I mean, how if you listen to the media today, how many wars would you think have been fought in recent years? I don't have a statistical answer to this, by the way. I'm just exploring the question. So it's not a trick question. It's what would you say? Yeah.
It could also be, following Poppy's point, that there's not many substantial victories being won now. Look at the Afghan war that's just ended. Why were we there? It's left a lot of people asking, well, why were we there in the first place, you know? We've just left now the Afghan to sort it out themselves, really. And in a way, some people have said, well, we've lost a lot of soldiers, we've wasted a lot of soldiers, because we've got involved in wars that quite clearly haven't worked out. And unlike the world wars that we had. So basically, all the other, they're more localized. There's no real, it's all blurry. The end is blurry. You can't actually see what's clear, right or wrong in that situation. It's a lot more debated now.
That's a good point, thank you. And I mean, of course, that's the other thing about media coverage, is we tend to hear about wars where our troops are involved. But there are numerous wars around the world where that's not the case. And the most deadly conflict since the Second World War, you may or may not be surprised to hear, was the war in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But European forces haven't been, involved in that. And but that war, which essentially still goes on in parts of the Congo, even if it may not be called a war anymore, has killed well over 1 million people. And that's not something we necessarily hear about regularly in the news. There's another point there.
One difference between World War One and you could even say World War Two in this case about today's wars is that it's almost like international superpowers such as America and Britain. I wouldn't say Britain is an international superpower, but larger countries like Russia and stuff are almost afraid to join in, not with the conflict, but with resolving situations such as the Somali crisis, with the conflict there, as people think that it'll divulge into another almost Cold War. But obviously this time the Cold War being with nuclear weapons, so it's almost like the international superpowers are scared. That's what I want to say.
Thank you. Yeah, nuclear weapons is something we haven't really discussed today, but of course that threat is still out there, yeah. And I think we're just going to take this one last point for now.
And the thing about the media, like, now that there's richer sort of people, they don't really care much about wars like on the other side of the world. They care more about, like, new iPhones or something. So they've sort of become selfish about these sort of things. So that's the difference between now and then.
Yeah, very interesting point, because there hasn't really been a mass peace movement in the same way that we saw perhaps in times past, has there, in this country, for example. And yet we know far more about what goes on in the world, in theory, or we should be able to find out more because of global media. So we've sort of talked about the problems, and we've talked about the real challenges facing people in their daily lives, the damage that war does to people. After a short break, we're going to come back, and the last section of today is going to be looking at, well, what has been done to promote peace, and what can you do to promote a culture of peace? Because that's we want to end on that's what we want to end on. That's what we want to promote throughout all of this work, is a sense of it's not just despair. There are things that can be done.